Most people believe their problem is laziness. It is not. The real problem is negotiation. Every morning, your brain bargains with comfort, trades discipline for temporary relief, and quietly erodes your authority over your own life. The tragedy is that it feels normal. You wake with intention, but within minutes the bargaining begins. 5 more minutes of sleep, one easier choice, one delay that feels harmless. Your mind whispers that discipline can start tomorrow, and slowly, day after day, your standards are traded away for comfort disguised as reason. Most men never notice this pattern. They believe they lack motivation. They search for inspiration, new routines, new productivity tricks. But the real enemy is negotiation itself. As long as your mind is allowed to bargain, comfort will always win. For centuries, Japanese warriors understood this weakness with brutal clarity. They developed systems that treated comfort as a warning signal, not a reward. When the body wanted rest, training began. When the mind resisted, the ritual continued. This was not motivation. It was structure. An ancient Japanese system built to remove negotiation entirely. The warrior did not ask how he felt. He followed the ritual, day after day, season after season, until discipline stopped being effort and became identity. You may believe such systems belong to another era, another culture, another kind of man. But the mechanism is universal. The human brain still protects comfort above growth. It still negotiates with discomfort every single day. And that is why your discipline collapses even when your intentions are sincere. And your mind was never trained to refuse negotiation. But there is a system that can end it. A method drawn from Japanese philosophy that forces the mind to obey structure instead of emotion. A discipline system that turns ordinary people into individuals who no longer debate with comfort. However, there is a cost. This system does not strengthen your current identity. It destroys it first. The routines you rely on will fracture. Your ego will resist. The people around you may question what you are becoming. Because once negotiation ends, comfort loses its power. And when comfort loses power, the person you used to be cannot survive. The system demands something few people accept: the death of the comfortable version of yourself. The obedient voice that once followed comfort must disappear. In its place, another mind must emerge, one trained through ritual, pressure, and relentless consistency. And the moment that transformation begins, your life will never return to the comfort you once knew. Before this story continues, you must make a decision that most people avoid. Passive watching will not change the mind that negotiates with comfort. Transformation begins when a private intention becomes a public commitment. If you are serious about mastering your mind instead of negotiating with it, subscribe to this channel now and like this video. That action is not about algorithms. It is a signal that you are choosing discipline over distraction. Then write one sentence in the comments, a clear declaration. No excuses, no conditions. Write, "I stop negotiating with comfort today." Those words matter more than you think. When a commitment is spoken publicly, the mind begins to treat it as a contract instead of a wish. This story is not entertainment. It is a mirror. And the declaration you write now will determine whether you remain a spectator or begin the same confrontation that changed Kenji Sato's life. Because the system you are about to witness only works for those willing to stand behind their own decision. Kenji Sato was not a failure. That is what made his situation dangerous. He was 34 years old, employed at a logistics company in Osaka, living in a narrow apartment above a convenience store that never closed. His life followed a pattern so common it barely registered as a problem. Wake up tired, drink coffee too quickly, commute through silent trains filled with other exhausted men staring into their phones. From the outside, Kenji's life appeared respectable. His salary arrived every month. His co-workers described him as reliable. He attended his son's weekend activities when work allowed it. Nothing about his existence suggested collapse, but collapse rarely looks dramatic. It begins quietly, hidden inside routine. Kenji's morning started with promises. Each sunrise carried the same thought. Today will be different. He would exercise before work, eat better, focus more, maybe even restart the hobbies he abandoned years earlier. Yet by evening, those promises dissolved. Work stress piled up. The train ride home drained what little energy remained. Convenience store dinners replaced real meals. The television filled the hours before sleep. Then the cycle repeated. You may recognize this pattern. Most people do not lose discipline suddenly. They trade it away in small negotiations. With one delayed workout, one easier meal, one postponed goal. Your brain frames these choices as harmless compromises. But neuroscience research from Stanford has shown that decision fatigue slowly weakens self-control throughout the day. Each small negotiation drains authority from the next one. Kenji did not know the research, but he was living the experiment. Every day required hundreds of tiny decisions. Each decision demanded energy. By the time evening arrived, his mind wanted the easiest path available. Comfort. And comfort always spoke the same language. You worked hard today. You deserve to relax. You can start tomorrow. Kenji believed those voices were reasonable, responsible even. After all, he was not trying to become a warrior. He was just trying to survive adulthood. But something inside him felt the erosion. It appeared in small moments. Walking up stairs that once felt easy, struggling to concentrate during meetings, looking at photographs from 5 years earlier and realizing the man in those pictures seemed stronger, more alert, more disciplined. Late at night, Kenji sometimes sat at the small kitchen table after his son had fallen asleep during weekend visits. The apartment would be silent, except for the hum of refrigerators downstairs in the store. He would open a notebook he bought months earlier. On the first page, he had written a list of goals. Exercise consistently, wake up earlier, learn something meaningful again. The handwriting looked confident, but the rest of the notebook remained empty. You might think Kenji lacked motivation. That would be the easy explanation. But motivation was not the issue. He still cared about improving. He still imagined a stronger version of himself. The problem was that every day contained too many negotiations with comfort, and comfort always won. On Monday mornings, he told himself he would start fresh. On Tuesday, he postponed again. By Friday, the idea of change felt exhausting, so the cycle continued. Kenji convinced himself this was simply what adulthood looked like, a gradual exchange between ambition and responsibility. But quiet erosion has consequences. The human mind can tolerate many compromises before it recognizes the truth. You are no longer becoming stronger. You are becoming weaker slowly enough that no single moment feels alarming. And that is how ordinary lives quietly collapse. No catastrophe, no dramatic failure. Just years of negotiation that slowly reduce the standards you once believed were permanent. From the outside, Kenji still appeared stable. Inside, something was slipping. His body felt heavier each year, his focus shorter, his confidence thinner. Yet he kept telling himself the same sentence millions of people repeat every night. Tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow he will regain control. Tomorrow discipline will return. But tomorrow never arrived. And the most dangerous part was that nothing in Kenji's life looked urgent enough to force change. Until the moment came that exposed the truth in front of everyone. The moment that exposed Kenji's decline arrived on a gray Tuesday morning during the company's annual health assessment. The event was routine. Every employee in the logistics office was required to participate, to blood pressure checks, basic mobility tests. A short endurance run around a small track behind the building. Most people treated it as an inconvenience. Kenji treated it the same way. When his turn arrived, he stood among a group of younger co-workers stretching casually near the starting line. Some joked with each other. Others checked their phones. The atmosphere was relaxed. Kenji adjusted the sleeves of his training shirt and told himself the same lie he had repeated for years. It will be fine. He had not run seriously in months, but he assumed his body still remembered what it once knew. He assumed his baseline strength remained intact beneath the fatigue of daily life. The whistle blew. At first, everything felt manageable. Kenji moved at a controlled pace, breathing steadily as the group rounded the first turn. A few younger employees accelerated ahead, laughing as they competed with each other. Kenji kept his rhythm. Then the second lap began. His breathing changed. Not dramatically at first, just a slight tightening in the chest, a mild burn in the legs, the familiar discomfort that comes when the body realizes it has been pushed beyond its routine. But something was different this time. The burn did not fade. It intensified. By the third lap, Kenji's lungs felt constricted, pulling air that never seemed to satisfy his body's demand. His stride shortened. The ground felt heavier beneath his feet. He glanced to the side and noticed two co-workers nearly 10 years younger passing him with ease. One of them looked surprised. "Kenji, you okay?" the younger man asked. Kenji forced a nod and kept moving, but the body has a way of exposing truths the mind tries to hide. Halfway through the fourth lap, his vision narrowed. The track blurred slightly. His breathing became loud enough that he could hear it over the sound of footsteps around him. Then his legs stopped responding. Kenji slowed to a walk. A few people noticed. One employee jogged past and glanced back with an awkward expression that tried to hide concern. Another simply smirked. Kenji bent forward, hands on his knees, fighting to control the violent rhythm of his breathing. Sweat ran down his face. The air tasted metallic. The whistle blew again to signal the end of the run. But Kenji had not finished. He remained on the side of the track, chest heaving, while the rest of the group gathered near the water station. No one said anything directly, but silence has a language. A few co-workers whispered quietly. Others avoided eye contact. One younger employee laughed softly before turning away. The humiliation did not arrive all at once. It settled slowly. Kenji walked toward the locker room with heavy steps, pretending nothing unusual had happened. His shirt clung to his back. His heart still pounded inside his chest. Inside the locker room, conversations lowered when he entered. One man spoke in a low voice that was not quite quiet enough. "Man, I thought he was in better shape than that." Another chuckled. Kenji opened his locker without responding. He focused on removing his shoes, avoiding the mirror mounted above the bench, because mirrors reveal things words cannot hide. When he finally looked up, he saw a man who appeared older than he remembered. His shoulders slumped slightly. His eyes looked tired. Or the confident posture he once carried had disappeared somewhere between years of convenience and compromise. For a moment he stood there staring at his reflection, and something inside him cracked. Not anger, not embarrassment, recognition. The man he believed himself to be, capable disciplined, reliable, no longer existed in the form he imagined. The image in the mirror belonged to someone else. Psychologists at Harvard describe this moment as identity dissonance. It occurs when the narrative you tell yourself collides violently with observable reality. It is one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences a person can face, because the mind suddenly realizes something terrifying. The story you believed about yourself might be false. Kenji closed the locker quietly. He finished the workday without speaking much, though the embarrassment lingered like a shadow behind every conversation. But the most powerful moment arrived later that evening. His son was visiting for dinner. The boy sat at the small table eating noodles, while Kenji prepared tea in the kitchen. The apartment smelled faintly of soy sauce and steam. For several minutes, the boy watched his father move slowly around the room. Then he asked a simple question. "Dad, why do you always look tired?" Kenji froze. The words were not cruel. They were curious, innocent, but they struck deeper than the laughter in the locker room. Children observe patterns adults try to ignore. Kenji set the kettle down carefully and turned toward the table. "I'm just busy with work," he said. The boy nodded, accepting the explanation without challenge. But Kenji knew the truth was more complicated. The work had not made him weak. Negotiation had. Years of bargaining with comfort had quietly rewritten the rules of his life. And now the consequences were visible even to his son. That realization stayed with him long after the dishes were washed and the apartment became silent again. He sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty notebook he once intended to fill with plans for improvement. The humiliation at the track, the mirror in the locker room, the question from his son. 3 moments that formed a single undeniable conclusion. The life he was living no longer matched the man he believed himself to be. And once that realization appears, something dangerous happens. Because collapse does not always destroy a person. Sometimes it opens the door to a completely different path. Kenji did not know it yet. But the next chapter of his life would begin in the most ordinary place imaginable. A quiet judo gym on a Saturday afternoon. 3 weeks passed after the humiliation at the company health assessment. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but the illusion Kenji once carried no longer protected him. Every small action now felt exposed. Every shortcut felt visible. He still woke early, but not to train. He woke because the mind refuses to forget humiliation once it has tasted it. The memory replayed in fragments, the sound of breathing too loud on the track, the whispering in the locker room, the reflection in the mirror, and the question from his son. "Why do you always look tired?" One Saturday afternoon, Kenji accompanied the boy to a local judo practice. It was a small gym tucked behind a quiet street in Osaka, but the building smelled faintly of tatami mats and disinfectant. The air carried the steady rhythm of bodies falling against padded floors. Children trained in pairs under the watchful eye of an elderly instructor standing near the wall. Kenji noticed the man immediately, not because he moved loudly. The opposite. He barely moved at all. The instructor stood with his hands folded behind his back, observing the room with a calm intensity that felt almost unnatural. His posture was straight but relaxed, like a tree rooted firmly in the ground. His name was Takeda. Even in his 70s, he carried the quiet presence of someone who had spent a lifetime inside disciplined environments. His hair was gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes remained alert. Kenji watched as Takeda stepped onto the mat to demonstrate a technique. A younger assistant attacked him with controlled force. The movement that followed lasted less than 2 seconds. Takeda shifted his weight, redirected the energy, and the assistant collapsed onto the mat with a sharp slap. No wasted motion, no tension, just control. The room fell silent for a moment before the students resumed training. Kenji felt something unfamiliar while watching that exchange. Not admiration, recognition. This was what stability looked like, not the unstable discipline Kenji tried to summon through motivation. This was something deeper, something built through repetition. After practice ended, Kenji waited near the wall while his son changed clothes. Takeda approached him quietly. "You watched carefully," the old instructor said. Kenji nodded slightly. "It's impressive," he replied. Takeda studied him for a moment. "What impressive is not the correct word." Kenji hesitated. "What is the correct word?" Takeda's expression remained calm. "Predictable." The answer confused him. "Predictable?" Takeda gestured towards the empty mat. "A system produces predictable results. If you repeat the process long enough, the outcome becomes inevitable." Kenji considered the statement. "My life doesn't feel predictable," he admitted. Takeda's eyes narrowed slightly. "Every life is predictable," he said. "The question is whether the system guiding it is intentional." The words settled heavily in the air. Kenji realized he had never considered that possibility. He believed discipline depended on mood, energy, motivation. The idea that behavior could be governed by a rigid system felt unfamiliar. Takeda seemed to sense the confusion. "But most people believe they lack motivation," the instructor continued. "But motivation is unreliable. Warriors did not depend on motivation." "What did they depend on?" Kenji asked. Takeda stepped closer. "Ritual." He paused before speaking again. "There is a Japanese philosophy called Fudoshin." Kenji repeated the word quietly. Fudoshin. "It means the immovable mind," Takeda said. "A state where your thoughts do not bend toward comfort or fear. Your actions remain stable regardless of emotion." Kenji listened carefully. "That sounds impossible." Takeda shook his head. "It is not impossible. It is trained." He knelt beside the mat and ran his hand across the surface. Warriors developed systems to remove negotiation from daily life, and the ritual decided their actions before emotions had time to interfere. Kenji felt the truth in those words immediately. Negotiation. That was the invisible enemy he fought every morning. "But people today don't live like warriors," Kenji said quietly. Takeda stood again. "People today suffer because they do not live like warriors." The statement was not aggressive, it was observational. "For centuries," Takeda continued, "Japanese martial training used daily rituals to shape behavior. Wake at the same hour. Train the body. Train the mind. Repeat until the action no longer requires thought." He looked directly at Kenji. Records from training schools more than 800 years old describe the same principle. Discipline is not emotional. It is structural. Kenji crossed his arms slowly. "What if someone fails?" Takeda nodded slightly. "Or they will fail." The answer surprised him. "Then why follow the system?" Takeda smiled faintly. "Because the system does not care about failure. It only cares whether you return." The simplicity of that idea unsettled Kenji. Years of self-criticism had convinced him discipline required perfection. But Takeda described something different: continuity. "You believe your problem is weakness," Takeda said. Kenji did not argue. But weakness is rarely physical. It is negotiation. The instructor's voice lowered slightly. "If you want to see how much control comfort has over your mind, begin a ritual that does not allow negotiation." Kenji looked at the mat again. "What kind of ritual?" Takeda answered without hesitation. "You wake early, cold water, physical training, silence every day." Kenji laughed quietly. Where's that sound simple? Takeda's expression did not change. It is simple. It is also difficult. He stepped toward the door. If you attempt it, your mind will reveal how much power comfort truly has. Kenji watched the old instructor leave the gym. The idea sounded straightforward, almost too straightforward. But something inside him recognized the danger immediately, because a system that removes negotiation also removes excuses, and the first days would expose just how much control comfort still held over his life. The ritual began on a cold Monday morning before sunrise. Kenji did not wake naturally. The alarm shattered the silence of his apartment at 4:45 a.m., vibrating against the wooden nightstand with mechanical indifference. His body resisted immediately. The room was dark, the air still heavy with sleep, and every instinct urged him to silence the alarm and return beneath the blanket. This was the first moment of negotiation. And for years, negotiation had always won. Kenji sat up slowly, pressing his palms against his face as if physically holding his mind in place. The memory of Takeda's voice surfaced with unsettling clarity. The ritual decides, not emotion. He swung his legs off the bed. The floor felt cold beneath his feet. His muscles complained as he stood. Nothing about the moment felt heroic. Discipline rarely does in the beginning. It feels awkward, mechanical, almost artificial. Kenji walked to the bathroom sink and turned the cold water tap. The first splash shocked his system instantly. The water was not refreshing. It was brutal. His body jerked backward, heart suddenly racing as cold flooded his face and neck. But his mind screamed the same message millions of minds scream every morning. Stop. This is unnecessary. Go back to bed. But Takeda had warned him about this moment. The Japanese ritual did not care about comfort. It existed specifically to confront it. The shock of cold water was not symbolic. It was a signal to the nervous system. Negotiation has ended. Kenji washed his face again. Then he changed into training clothes and stepped outside. Osaka was still asleep. The streets were empty except for the distant rumble of delivery trucks and the hum of vending machines glowing along quiet sidewalks. The sky remained dark, a deep shade of blue just beginning to fade toward morning. Kenji began running. The first steps felt heavy. His legs lacked rhythm. His breathing sounded loud in the quiet street. Nothing about the run felt graceful, but the ritual continued. Run, return, push-ups, stretching, then silence. The silence was the strangest part. Takeda had instructed him to sit still for 10 minutes after training. No phone, no music, no distraction, just breathing. The first morning felt unbearable. Kenji's mind raced violently. Thoughts collided with each other. Unfinished work tasks, grocery lists, memories of embarrassment, the constant whisper suggesting the ritual was pointless. This was the true battlefield. Not the run, not the cold water, the mind itself. MIT behavioral research on habit automation shows something important about human psychology. The brain aggressively protects established comfort loops. When routines suddenly change, the mind creates resistance in order to restore the old pattern. Kenji was experiencing that resistance in its purest form. Where the ritual ended after 30 minutes. He dressed for work and left the apartment feeling strangely alert, though the fatigue returned by mid-afternoon. Day 2 arrived with even stronger resistance. The alarm sounded again before sunrise. This time, Kenji's mind prepared arguments before his eyes even opened. You slept poorly. You worked late yesterday. Skipping one day will not matter. The logic sounded reasonable, but the ritual did not permit negotiation. He stood again. Cold water, running shoes, dark streets. By day 3, the resistance intensified. His legs ached from unfamiliar movement. His sleep schedule struggled to adjust. The run felt slower, the push-ups weaker. The mind became more creative. Maybe start next week instead. Maybe adjust the system. Maybe the ritual is too extreme. But Takeda had warned him about these internal negotiations. The Japanese method of Kaizen does not focus on dramatic improvement. It focuses on relentless continuity. Small actions repeated daily until resistance dissolves. Survive the beginning. That is the rule. Days 4 through 7 were the hardest. Kenji's body hovered between exhaustion and adaptation. Some mornings he sat on the edge of his bed for nearly a minute before forcing himself to stand. The silence after training remained uncomfortable, his mind constantly searching for distraction. Yet something subtle began to shift. The arguments inside his head grew shorter. The alarm rang, and his body moved before the mind finished negotiating. Cold water no longer felt shocking. It felt familiar. The run remained difficult, but the rhythm improved. Day 10 arrived quietly. That Kenji noticed something strange during the morning ritual. His mind attempted the usual argument. Sleep longer, skip today. But the thought faded before he fully considered it. The body simply stood up. This was the first small victory of the system. Action occurring before negotiation. By day 14, the ritual had settled into a pattern. The streets still looked dark at sunrise. The cold water still shocked the skin slightly. The run still demanded effort. But something deeper had changed. The ritual was becoming automatic. Kenji no longer debated whether to perform it. He simply performed it. And that realization created a new and unexpected problem. Because the ritual was becoming easier. And when discipline becomes easier, the mind searches for new ways to escape it. The third week did not collapse dramatically, but there was no loud failure, no dramatic announcement that discipline had ended. It began quietly, exactly the way weakness usually returns. Kenji had been following the ritual for 14 days. The system had started to feel stable. The alarm rang. He stood, cold water, running shoes, empty streets, silence. The process repeated without much thought. That was the danger. When progress appears, the mind begins to relax its guard. Monday of week 3 introduced the disruption. Kenji's company entered a demanding logistics period. Deadlines tightened. New shipments arrived unexpectedly. Meetings stretched late into the evening. By the time Kenji reached his apartment that night, exhaustion wrapped around him like a weight. He glanced at the clock. 11:48 p.m. His body felt heavy. His eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets all day. But the idea of waking before sunrise felt unreasonable. This was the moment where negotiation returned. And negotiation rarely announces itself openly. It disguises itself as practicality. Kenji sat on the edge of his bed and ran a hand through his hair. One morning off will help you recover. That was the first thought. You need rest to function at work. That was the second. The logic sounded intelligent, responsible even. For 2 weeks he had followed the ritual without exception. Missing a single morning would not destroy the system. At least that is what the mind wanted him to believe. The alarm sounded at 4:45. Kenji opened his eyes slowly. His body did not move. The negotiation lasted only a few seconds. Then he reached over and silenced the alarm. The room returned to darkness. He slept another 3 hours. When he woke again, sunlight filled the apartment window. At first, nothing felt different. He showered, dressed, and went to work. The day moved forward normally. But something subtle shifted inside him. The ritual had broken. And once a pattern breaks, the mind notices. The next morning, the alarm rang again. This time Kenji woke immediately, but the thought appeared again. "You already missed yesterday. Starting tomorrow will feel cleaner." That sentence had destroyed thousands of routines before. Kenji remained in bed. Day 2 of the relapse. Comfort patterns returned with shocking speed. The brain is efficient when it reactivates old habits. Research from Yale on behavioral loops shows that previous routines remain stored inside neural pathways long after new habits begin forming. When the new system weakens, the old one resurfaces instantly. But Kenji skipped the run again. 2 days became 3. Each morning the same conversation repeated inside his mind. "You were doing well, but work is stressful right now. Restart next week when things calm down." The ritual that once felt automatic now felt distant again. On Thursday evening, Kenji visited the judo gym to pick up his son. Takeda stood near the wall as usual, observing the training session with silent focus. Kenji hesitated before approaching him. The instructor looked at him once and immediately understood. "You stopped the ritual," Takeda said. It was not a question. Kenji exhaled slowly. "Yes." Takeda nodded slightly, as if the outcome had been expected. "How many days?" the instructor asked. 3. Takeda gestured toward the empty mat. "Good." Kenji frowned. "Good?" "Yes," Takeda replied calmly. "Now you understand the system." Kenji looked confused. "I failed." Takeda shook his head. "You returned to comfort. That is different from failure." The distinction felt strange. "Then what is failure?" Kenji asked. Takeda stepped onto the mat and motioned for him to follow. "Failure is abandoning the return." Kenji stood across from him. Takeda folded his hands behind his back. "There is a Japanese principle called gammon," he said. Kenji listened. "It means enduring difficulty without complaint and without abandoning the path." Takeda paused before continuing. "Western thinking often treats discipline like a perfect streak. If the streak breaks, the system feels destroyed." Kenji nodded slightly. That was exactly how the relapse felt. "But gammon teaches something else," Takeda continued. "Discipline is not perfection. It is continuity." He pointed toward the door. "You missed 3 days. That is irrelevant." Kenji blinked. "Irrelevant?" "Yes," Takeda said calmly, "because tomorrow morning you will wake again." The simplicity of the statement felt almost insulting. "You expect me to just start again?" Takeda's voice remained steady. "The system expects it." Kenji crossed his arms. "But the motivation is gone." Takeda looked at him carefully. Motivation was never part of the system. Silence filled the gym. Takeda stepped closer. "Do you think warriors followed their ritual perfectly every day for decades?" Kenji did not answer. "They failed constantly," Takeda said, "but they returned immediately." He leaned slightly forward. "The power of the system is not perfection. It is the speed of return." Kenji felt something shift in his thinking. And for years he believed discipline required flawless consistency. One mistake felt like evidence of weakness. Takeda was describing a different rule entirely. Break the ritual. Return the next morning. Break again. Return again. The system did not collapse because of imperfection. It collapsed only when the return stopped. Takeda stepped back. "Tomorrow morning the alarm will ring again," he said. Kenji nodded slowly. "Yes." "And what will you do?" Kenji answered quietly. "I will stand up." Takeda gave a small, approving nod. Then the system continues. The next morning, the alarm sounded. Kenji opened his eyes. His body felt heavy. His mind still carried the echo of the previous week's excuses. But this time the negotiation ended quickly. He stood. Cold water. running shoes, dark street. The ritual resumed. Oh, and something about that return felt stronger than the original beginning. Because now Kenji understood the real law of discipline. It does not require perfection. It requires refusal to stay fallen. And the system he had begun was about to reveal its next transformation. By the time the ritual reached its 30th day, something fundamental had changed inside Kenji's mornings. The alarm still rang at 4:45. But the negotiation no longer followed. His eyes opened. His body moved. The sequence unfolded almost automatically. Feet touched the cold floor. Water struck his face. Running shoes tightened around his ankles. No debate, no delay. The mind that once spent entire mornings arguing with comfort had grown strangely quiet. This is how systems reshape identity. Not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through the slow replacement of decision with structure. Kenji stepped into the empty Osaka streets again. The air was colder now. Winter had begun settling into the city, leaving the sidewalks damp with morning frost. His breath formed small clouds in the darkness as he ran. 30 days earlier, every step had felt like effort. Now the rhythm arrived naturally. His legs moved with steadier control. His breathing no longer collapsed into panic. But the true transformation was not physical. It was psychological. The ritual had begun occupying a permanent place in his day. Like brushing teeth, like locking the door before leaving the apartment. It simply happened. This was the silent power of habit automation. Researchers at Stanford have observed that when routines become stable, the brain reduces the mental energy required to perform them. Decision-making decreases. Resistance fades. Kenji no longer asked whether he should run. He ran. After the run came the push-ups, then stretching, then silence. The silence had once been unbearable. Now it felt different. Kenji sat cross-legged on the floor each morning, back straight, hands resting on his knees. The room remained dark except for the faint light leaking through the curtains. His breathing slowed. Thoughts still appeared. Work responsibilities, bills, random memories. But they passed more quickly now. Takeda had explained this stage during one of their brief conversations after judo practice. Discipline begins with action, the old instructor said, but it matures through attention. Kenji had asked what that meant, but Takeda answered with another principle from the old martial traditions. Zanshin. The word sounded sharp and deliberate. It is the state of sustained awareness, Takeda explained. A warrior remains mentally present even after the action ends. He gestured with 2 fingers, as if following an invisible line. In combat, it means you remain alert after striking. In daily life, it means your attention does not collapse when the task ends. The explanation sounded simple, but practicing it revealed its difficulty. Most people lose attention the moment pressure disappears. They relax. Their posture collapses. Their mind drifts into distraction. Zanshin demands the opposite. Remain aware, remain stable, even when nothing forces you to. Kenji began applying this principle throughout his day. During work meetings, he sat more upright, listening carefully instead of letting his mind wander. When speaking, he slowed his sentences slightly, choosing words with greater precision. Small adjustments, but people noticed. A coworker asked him one afternoon, "Did you start training again?" Kenji shrugged. Something like that. The truth was deeper than training. His internal structure had changed. The ritual had removed one dangerous element from his life: negotiation. And once negotiation disappears in one area, it begins disappearing elsewhere. He worked through tasks without constantly checking his phone. He finished assignments before exhaustion forced shortcuts. The discipline began spreading. Day 40 arrived. Then day 50. By day 66, Kenji noticed something unsettling. The old voice inside his mind, the one that once argued for comfort, had grown faint. It had not disappeared completely, but it no longer carried authority. This is what identity shift looks like. When actions repeat long enough, the mind stops viewing them as effort. It begins treating them as normal behavior. Kenji was no longer someone trying to build discipline. He was someone who simply followed his system. Takeda confirmed the observation one evening. "You are entering the second phase," the instructor said quietly. "What phase?" Kenji asked. Takeda studied him carefully. "The phase where discipline stops feeling heroic." Kenji frowned slightly. "That sounds disappointing." Takeda shook his head. "It is necessary." He stepped closer. "Heroic discipline is temporary. It depends on emotion." He tapped the side of his head lightly. "Structural discipline becomes identity." Kenji understood the distinction immediately. In the first weeks required intense effort. Now the effort had faded. The ritual simply existed. But Takeda offered a warning before Kenji left the gym that night. "The system is strong," he said, "but it has only been tested in isolation." Kenji looked confused. "What do you mean?" Takeda's expression remained calm. "Discipline is easy when the world is quiet." He paused before continuing. "The real test begins when the world starts reacting to your change." Kenji did not fully understand the warning yet, but he would soon, because when identity begins to shift, the environment surrounding you inevitably responds, and those responses reveal whether your discipline is truly stable. 6 months passed quietly. No celebration marked the moment. No dramatic declaration announced the transformation. Yet the changes surrounding Kenji had become impossible to ignore. His morning still began before sunrise. The ritual had not changed. Cold water, running shoes, empty streets, training, silence. The difference was that the ritual no longer felt like discipline. It felt like gravity, unavoidable. Kenji moved through it the same way the sun moved through the sky each morning. Not because of effort, because of order. This is the stage where identity begins revealing itself through behavior. The first person to notice was his son. One Saturday morning, the boy arrived early for a visit. Kenji had just finished his run and was stretching quietly on the living room floor when the doorbell rang. The boy stepped inside, watching carefully. "Did you run again?" he asked. Kenji nodded. The boy removed his shoes slowly, which then copied the movement Kenji had just performed. Hands on the floor, legs extended, stretching. The imitation was imperfect, but the signal was clear. Children rarely listen to lectures. They copy patterns. Kenji said nothing. He simply continued the ritual while the boy followed beside him. This was the first ripple. The second appeared at work. Months earlier, Kenji had been the quiet employee who completed assignments without attracting attention. Now something subtle in his presence had shifted. His posture remained upright during meetings. His responses were calm and deliberate. When others rushed through explanations, Kenji waited before speaking. Silence can carry authority when used correctly. One afternoon, during a tense discussion about delayed shipments, 2 co-workers began arguing over responsibility. The room grew louder, with frustration spreading through the group. Kenji waited. When the noise faded slightly, he spoke in a steady voice. "We already know what went wrong," he said. "Let's fix it." The room went quiet. No one argued. The conversation moved forward. Moments like that began appearing more frequently. Kenji did not attempt to dominate discussions. But when he spoke, people listened. Even the younger co-workers who once whispered after the health assessment now watched him differently. Respect rarely arrives loudly. It appears in small changes of behavior. A seat offered during meetings. A question asked for guidance. A conversation paused when you begin speaking. Psychologists refer to this phenomenon as identity signaling. Human beings constantly observe behavioral patterns to determine reliability and authority, for consistency sends a powerful signal. Kenji had become consistent. 6 months of ritual had altered the message his behavior communicated to the world. But the most important realization came from within. Late one evening, Kenji sat at the same kitchen table where the empty notebook once waited for motivation that never arrived. The notebook was no longer empty, not because he wrote grand plans, because the rituals had replaced the need for them. His goals were no longer ideas written on paper. They were actions repeated daily. Kenji opened the notebook and read the first page again. Exercise consistently. Wake up earlier. Learn something meaningful again. The handwriting looked almost naive now, because the man who wrote those goals believed discipline came from intention. The man sitting at the table understood something different. Discipline comes from structure. The transformation had not required inspiration. It required repetition strong enough to overwrite negotiation. Kenji closed the notebook slowly. For months, he had followed the system without questioning its direction. The ritual guided his actions day after day. But a deeper realization was forming. He was no longer performing discipline. He had become someone who simply lived inside it. And when identity reaches that point, one final confrontation remains. Because discipline tested in routine is only preparation. The real proof appears when you return to the place where your old identity collapsed. And Kenji was about to face that place again. 1 year after the humiliation on the company track, the same assessment returned. The announcement arrived in a short email sent to every employee. With health evaluation, endurance run, mandatory participation, the same procedures as before. For most people, it was routine. For Kenji, it felt like a quiet echo from another life. The morning of the assessment arrived without ceremony. Kenji woke before the alarm, as he had done for months. The ritual unfolded with the same steady rhythm. Cold water across the face, running shoes tightened, silent streets beneath his feet. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. That was the real transformation. A year earlier, the idea of physical testing had filled him with anxiety. His mind would have rehearsed fears long before the starting whistle. But now there was no tension, because the result no longer mattered. The ritual had already decided who he was. Later that morning, the employees gathered again near the same track behind the building. Yet the weather was similar to the year before. Cool air, gray sky, the faint smell of wet pavement. Kenji stood quietly among the group. Some of the younger workers stretched and joked the same way they had during the previous assessment. A few recognized him and nodded with casual respect. The whispers from last year had disappeared. But Kenji did not think about them. His mind remained calm. This is the essence of Fudoshin. The Japanese philosophy of the immovable mind does not mean emotion disappears. It means emotion no longer controls action. Pressure, comfort, fear, praise, none of these forces are allowed to bend behavior. The ritual decides. The whistle sounded. Kenji began running. His stride was steady, his breathing controlled. The body moved with efficiency built from hundreds of early mornings. Each lap passed with quiet rhythm. The co-workers who once outran him now struggled to match his pace. But the outcome was strangely irrelevant, because something far more important had already happened months earlier. Kenji's identity had shifted. The man who once negotiated with comfort was gone. In his place stood someone governed by structure. The ritual woke him before sunrise. The ritual guided his body. The ritual shaped his attention. Motivation no longer determined his actions. Structure did. By the time the final lap ended, Kenji slowed to a walk and looked across the quiet track. The memory of his collapse 1 year earlier appeared briefly in his mind. The heavy breathing, the locker room whispers, the reflection in the mirror. Those moments had once felt humiliating. Now they felt necessary, because humiliation had exposed the truth he could not ignore. Yet without that collapse, the system would never have begun. Kenji stepped away from the track and drank water slowly, his breathing calm and controlled. Nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no announcement, just a quiet confirmation that the transformation was complete. Fudoshin had done exactly what the ancient system promised. It had built a mind that no longer moved according to comfort. Kenji walked toward the building entrance with steady steps. His life still contained the same responsibilities. The same job, the same apartment, the same city streets. But one thing had changed permanently. He now possessed authority over himself. And that form of power does not announce itself loudly. It simply endures. If you want to begin the same transformation, make the decision now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next lessons on discipline, mental structure, and the systems that eliminate negotiation with comfort. Then write one clear sentence in the comments, not a long explanation, not a vague promise. Write the smallest action you will begin tomorrow that ends negotiation with comfort. One ritual, one decision, one commitment you will repeat regardless of mood. Because the immovable mind does not begin with motivation. It begins with a single action repeated long enough to replace the person you used to be.